The most notable date and accomplishment of our story here today is the landing of man on the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
No direct contribution to that, yet we were part of the electronics and emerging computer industry of that time, which was developing in parallel with the Apollo program. In 1969, when that first small step for man was taken, we were among the electronics engineers who were working on digital control systems and finding ourselves becoming pioneers of the mini-computer industry. Within Hewlett-Packard, we were already on the B version of their first computer launch, as it became the heart of systems like timeshare and real-time, propelling us all into new experiences faster than ever before. Our own Earth-based version of the Moon project. Apollo required an onboard computer, which in itself was a decision more difficult than we can possibly imagine today. Computers of those times were in air-conditioned rooms, full of heavy cabinets requiring considerable support to keep them going, consuming large amounts of power and producing a lot of heat. Yet navigation complexity to land on the Moon was evaluated to be well beyond the capability of manual calculation and control. So a computer in some forward-looking form would need to be envisaged and created. Thus, the Apollo Guidance Computer project was initiated, with MIT awarded the design contract and Raytheon to be the builder. 1969 was the moon landing, by which time the AGC's first incarnation had been used in unmanned Apollo missions, and the so-called Block 2 version on all missions since 1966. It is that development which brings us to present side by side the Apollo Guidance Computer and the Hewlett-Packard 2116 computer series. Those projects were initiated in the early 1960s, and the resulting machines were in use until the early 1970s. Each project was an early adopter of integrated circuits, replacing discrete transistor logic. However, the circuits used in the AGC were low density, mainly 3-input NOR gates, more than 5,000 of them. The reason for such a choice was the search for ultimate reliability, unfortunately not yet so evident in the emerging integrated circuits industry. Circuits used in the 2116 were higher density CTL ICs with multi-gate logic, also from Fairchild Semiconductor, mounted on conventional two-sided printed circuit boards. The 2116 was designed to work in industrial environments, rough compared with more usual computer room conditions, but still not requiring the same vigorous standards as for manned space flights and lunar landing. The AGC logic components were assembled in unconnected modules which plugged into a backplane. Thus, each module had no functionality until the backplane's wire-up connections provided it. Here we see the AGC's two module containers, and when we turn them over, we see the backplane. Our own construction would also use backplane wiring, a common method for prototypes and one-off designs. Now, in today's world, most smart devices have an operating system. In 1960, there were no ROMs and no internal hard disks. There were external systems disks, data disks, punch cards, magnetic tape decks, and some research being done into hardwired ROMs. Nothing yet to fit into the shoebox, which would become the AGC. So how to achieve rock-solid storage of an AGC operating system? Internal memory was a major limitation for all computers at that time. Core read-write memory was the state of the art, of which the first AGC in the so-called Block 1 had 1K words, which increased to 2K words in the second so-called Block 2 version in 1966. The first HP 2116 had 4K or 8K words. The 2116 did not have ROM. It had access to sufficient core memory for running the operating system, which it would load in from external devices. even if the early basic operating system was actually stored on paper tape. So we can begin to feel the limitations of computer technology which would need to be overcome in order to go to and land men on the moon. In theory, because magnetic core storage is non-volatile under normal Earth conditions, the AGC's read-write core memory could be increased in size to hold the operating system. But in practice, there is a risk of its content being corrupted by radiation or some other influence. But even more fundamentally, physical space and power consumption would be too high. The solution was to develop so-called core rope memory, which did not actually store information in its cores as with normal read-write core memory, but used its cores just momentarily to detect wiring patterns passing through or bypassing each of the cores. In this way, the operating system could be literally woven in place to be totally non-volatile, even in a hostile environment as in passing through radiation belts in space, and to take up an acceptable volume within the completed AGC. Disadvantage, however, was that it took more than a month of weaving and tens of thousands of dollars to create one ROM, thus excluding frequent updates and certainly excluding last-minute changes. Experience with the 2116 computer and its successors developed quickly and also very deeply. Being among the first, we became European specialists and teachers of the hardware to a fast-growing intake of technicians and engineers. Deeply because we learned from the designers, while teaching and repairing down to the logic gate level, which of course was unheard of after those initial few years, but at the time was an incredible learning and of great satisfaction. Just a few years later, no longer involved formally in the technical side, but not being able to get rid of, to exorcise the bug which had been implanted in us, we returned to HP hardware and to an own development project. HP had introduced many computers, but we had a great attraction to one in particular. It was the HP 9825 in 1976. Short story, we bought one. Even with a good employee discount, it cost us almost 2 months of salary. The HP 9825 was a powerful instrument controller using its own high-level programming language, yet capable of precise timing and individual bit control from the I/O section. In fact, 9825 was built around a proprietary 16-bit processor, about 10 years ahead of its time. It hosted similar register instructions and I/O structure to that of the 2100 series, so there was some architectural continuity. However, our interest was no longer with internal workings, rather learning the subtleties of its language, which we used for emulating pulse code modulation circuits and testing control logic designs. And finally, it was integrated into the very heart of our P82 project via a 16-bit parallel interface. The concept of P82 thus began quite some time before 1982. Implementation of the various concepts came together after moving to a new house, which provided the space and freedom to bring it to a working reality. P82 receives information from a 4-channel audio tape, which plays a soundtrack of stereo music and commentary, along with instructions for controlling multimedia and lighting. In short, the P82 provided total room control. The final part is the remote group for the railway, which required significant circuitry within the layout for control and for status return. P82 provides a real-time and scale-time clock and full 16-bit word duplex communication, producing a live show of music and commentary, while the train layout gets demonstrated automatically in real time. So, for the human interface, the display and keyboard, or the DSKY, In 1961, not much technology was available to talk with a computer. Electric typewriters were being adapted for input typing and for printing out. The teleprinter was not introduced until 1963. The Apollo project needed to provide astronauts an input keyboard and a clear and complete display of all the information they would need. But the best numeric display available at the time was the Nixie tube, used in instruments such as frequency counters. Too large and power-hungry for space travel. LED numeric displays would not become available until 1969, with the very first integrated LED decoder driver by HP. So what did the AGC design team come up with in those early 1960s? The Apollo solution evolved into a mixture of light bulbs and an ingenious numeric display built up of electroluminescent segments. Each segment operated by a two-state latching relay, resulting in the need for 132 of those relays, and of course all the corresponding decoding matrix and drivers. This all made the DSKY into a significant chunky unit for installation into the command module and in the lunar landing module. Curious Marc has a video on his YouTube channel showing the situation. He and the team have built a relay switching matrix for a real AGC DSKY, so we can witness this amazing display quality better than anything else around at that time. Later computers like the HP 2116 had also a multi-register display and front panel switches for troubleshooting and initial entry of a loader program, but can now take advantage of the teleprinter for regular human user interface. The HP 9825 came with a built-in thermal strip printer. We added an 80-column thermal printer for ease of reading program listings. The LED display shows a scrollable 32-character window on a total line length of 80 characters, the best choice of HP's available LED integrated displays. P82 uses 4 the larger hexadecimal displays plus a bunch of discrete red, yellow and green LEDs. We used a recuperated keypad for manual entry of instructions, resulting in an oversized module somewhat resembling the chunky DSKY of the AGC. So now 40 years later, we are reviving P82 to see what is still working and to bring to life some of the functions. We are not pretending any of this is comparable to landing on the moon. Our controller is very definitely a down-to-earth affair after all. Yet it is inspired by a rich history of digital computing, of which we very thankfully have been an active participant.